Welcome, everyone, to another expert-led large group supervision session here at Resilient Mind Psychotherapy. Our guest today is Megan Salar, a EMDR clinician, trainer, and author who earned her master's degree in clinical social work from Northwest Nazarene University in 2011. She has been extensively trained in the use of EMDR and other trauma-based interventions and specializes in the areas of trauma, attachment, and substance abuse. Megan has trained thousands of clinicians across the US as well as internationally, helping them get the most out of EMDR, trauma-focused approaches, and addiction-based skills and practices. Megan previously owned and operated an intensive outpatient treatment center that was voted best practice in 2019. She now owns and operates her own coaching, consulting, and training business and is passionate about genuinely changing the landscape of mental health and trauma treatment through an authentic, hands-on perspective that is uniquely her own. Megan is also the author of several books, including EMDR Workbook for Trauma and PTSD, EMDR for Dummies, the EMDR Flip Chart, and the forthcoming EMDR for Addiction, which is set to release in 2026. Without further ado, Megan, floor is all yours.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm really grateful to get to spend this time with you and share a little bit of information around EMDR. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A because I love to interact with anyone that I'm working with or training with. So kind of just what you can expect in our time together is I'm going to start with just kind of an overview of EMDR, like why EMDR, why do we use it, why should we maybe use it, why is it something that might be valuable to add to your practice, even if you're just going to sprinkle it in with other modalities. And then I'll give us a little taste of what that bilateral stimulation that EMDR is so widely known for is like, so that you can kind of experience just a little bit of that firsthand to see how you respond to it and if it's something you might be further interested in. So you can put in the chat right now if you want. I am curious how many of you have experienced your own EMDR or maybe already are using EMDR in your practice. So if you want to throw that in there for me, that would be great. I'm going to pull up some slides here for just a moment that we're going to talk about. And then, as was mentioned, we'll jump into the Q&A and we can expand on anything that you want to know in this world of EMDR. Can I have access to share, Artem?
Yeah, let me figure out how I could do that real quick.
You're totally fine. Yeah. I don't need it if it need be either. So EMDR is something that is near and dear to my heart. I've been training in EMDR for about 8 years now. And I first fell into EMDR. A friend of mine encouraged me to come and get trained. And I thought it was kind of like weird and woo-woo because it was before it caught as much traction as it has today. And in the first training, I was there and I was like, okay, I could see this being useful, but I don't know if my clients are going to buy into the eye movements. And the way that I was trained, we were taught with tactile tapping. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to like tap on my clients. Like, I don't know. So I was called on to be a demonstration for the trainer who at the time was the president of EMDRIA. And I come from my own background of complex trauma and had always struggled with kind of going into dissociation anytime that we would start to approach processing in my own like psychotherapy up until this point. So I, at the time, did not ever see myself training or doing any of this. And so when he calls upon me to do this demo, I'm like, all right, I'll pick something that's actually, he's like, pick something that you've always wanted to work past. And I picked an incident that I had not been able to have relief around for years, almost a decade at the time. And it was something that actively just lived in me. You know, those experiences where it's like you experience that trigger and it genuinely feels like you're sucked back into time and it's reoccurring. This was one of those events for me. So we do this session of EMDR that I all of a sudden am not dissociating or disconnecting from. I'm able to stay present. It's very emotional and heavy. And I'm like, okay, that was a good session. I still don't have like a ton of buy-in. Like I thought the experience was cool. And then a couple weeks, maybe a couple months later, I'm put in a situation that involved this trauma that I was working through. And for the first time in almost a decade, I don't have a response to it. I'm like, that happened. And then I was like, holy cow, this works. And it changed my life on my own journey of EMDR as well. It's been something that truly, truly gave me freedom and healing from things that I never thought that I would have healing from, especially once I really bought in and did my own EMDR work. And it's also something that I've seen change the lives of my clients. And I'm not saying it's a one size fits all because I've still had dozens of clients that maybe just don't like EMDR or they're not ready to go in and do that deep internal work. But it is a tool that I've come to learn to honor and respect in a variety of ways. Interestingly enough, the way that I've been using EMDR is kind of changing over the years. As the more you get comfortable with the model, you kind of find these interesting ways to utilize it. And one of my favorite ways that I've recently been really applying this is really observing, those neural pathways that we see clients come in and they kind of have these neural feedback loops of the way they think about themselves, the way they think about the world, and the way that they think about others. And how that can be kind of, even when we're doing the trauma work, they can still get stuck in those neural pathways and those neural feedback loops. So I've been doing a lot of future-oriented work where we just add bilateral stimulation, and it's almost kind of like mindfulness practice. But there's something about incorporating the bilateral stimulation that really helps to imprint and lay down these new neural pathways that can override those existing negative pathways. That's really, really cool to see that play out and to help kind of break those chains of maybe some of those unwanted thought patterns or looping that they get into. Okay, so I can pull up stuff now.
Yeah, you should be good.
Yeah, let me share a few things with you guys. Just a brief overview of what this model really looks like and what it does, especially for those of you that maybe are curious about EMDR but don't really know everything that it entails. Let me. So why EMDR? And we'll look at in a minute kind of just this overarching definition of EMDR that I'm going to help kind of break down what the model actually does. But prior to that, let's look at a couple of these like key components and reasons of why using EMDR really might be helpful or beneficial for your clients or even for yourself. So one of the first things that really stands out and literature really supports is EMDR has a unique ability to kind of help reprocess and any of these maladaptively stored like patterns, experiences that the brain has kind of locked onto because of trauma or overwhelming events. So it has the ability to get in, reprocess those traumatic experiences and not from an exposure basis. Like sometimes it might feel like a little exposing, but it really isn't. That's not the premise. It's really just to get into that subconscious memory network and kind of help the brain release it. Also, one of the things that you'll notice, I think pretty quickly, depending on what you're working with, is it also has this really strong ability, just like I shared kind of with my own personal story, of lessening the intensity of the emotional charge that the brain's attached or connected, maybe with some of these triggers or, experiences that you've had in your life. So you still know the event happened, but there's not that intense emotional reaction to it typically after you've gone through EMDR. This one is also huge to me as I was talking about those negative feedback loops, right? Also, a benefit of this is you'll see an increase kind of in self-esteem. You'll see a reduction in negative cognitions or negative beliefs that a person carries. So it kind of helps lessen really the shame, if you want to think of it that way. And then you'll also notice a reduction of the way that the brain and body responds to trauma. So just again, like I shared with my experience overall, and the system kind of starts to change the way that maybe it responds to those triggers or that it engages with that memory network when it comes up. And to me, there's four kind of goals of this EMDR process that are a little reminiscent of what we just looked at. The first and foremost that EMDR is really known for, as I was talking about, kind of like giving into that subconscious and helping kind of desensitize or like kind of flesh out those stuck memories, image triggers, whatever it might be. Our goal is really to activate, which I'll talk to you guys about a little bit more here in just a few minutes, what we refer to as the brain's natural healing process. And so one of the theories in EMDR is we want to stimulate and activate what we refer to as the AIP, which is the adaptive information processing system of the brain. And this AIP is really critical to understand, and it takes a lot of pressure off of us as the clinician. And kind of the theory here is that our brain is built with an adaptive way to process, move through, digest, make sense of things, integrate experiences. And when we experience kind of overwhelming events or circumstances, it can kind of take that natural healing, that AIP offline. So I liken it to, our bodies have a natural way that they heal, right? Like you get a cut, your body goes through this natural process where it kind of regenerates, heals, returns to homeostasis. The brain has kind of that same natural healing process with how it naturally is kind of formed to integrate experiences. And sometimes, just like if we get an injury, like a cut or something like that, maybe we need additional resources to help kick the body's natural healing process back in line. Like we might need stitches or we might need antibiotics or ointment. EMDR is one of those things that's going to help resume and bring that natural healing process back online. You'll also notice, and another really big goal of EMDR is truly, as it says in the name, right, to desensitize, lessen those triggers or stuck points. So to take that, again, the emotional charge or even the somatic charge out of some of these things that we've gone through. And then reestablishing the meaning. So meaning making is huge in the way that we store memories, the way that we make sense of things and our perceptions. And EMDR does have a very unique way of going into something troubling, upsetting, and overwhelming and reestablishing a meaning that doesn't have to carry so much shame or negativity with it. And then lastly, like I've already mentioned, but just the increase of self-esteem that it brings and the ability to find value despite what you've been through or what has happened to you. So I'm going to share, just for honoring the fidelity of the model quickly, this definition, and I'm going to touch on a few of these key components that will help you better understand kind of what we do in EMDR. And then I'm going to break a few of those down for you, just in case you're curious of what this might look like. So we know now that EMDR is obviously one of the most researched and evidence-based psychotherapy treatments for PTSD and trauma worldwide. It's recognized by the World Health Organization, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and a whole body of others that endorse its successful outcomes, especially for trauma and PTSD. It has growing bodies of research and evidence now that are not just supporting how effective it can be for trauma. And I do want to tell you this, that I use EMDR for almost everything now. So initially it was really thought of for just treating trauma. This is one of my favorite treatment approaches for working with addictive, compulsive, and impulsive behaviors. I love it for anxiety, agoraphobia, sometimes even heavy depression, future orientation, sports performance, any of those kind of things. EMDR kind of works across the body of many different things that we might see in our offices. Also, there's ways to modify this for children, so can be very user-friendly once you understand the model. So as I was kind of mentioning on the prior slide, EMDR is really based in this adaptive information processing model. And all this kind of postulates is it kind of believes that our psychopathology, right, is occurs basically because there's maladaptive encoding that happens. When we experience something stressful, that adaptive information processing, or the AIP, as we call it, gets kind of taken offline. And therefore, the brain's natural ability to integrate and kind of digest and move through an experience, it can't do it. So it kind of gets stuck with this traumatic information that leads to these intrusive images, triggers, all of the things. And so from an EMDR standpoint, they believe that once we get this AIP back online, we can integrate those experiences. And hopefully this will resume that natural functioning. To do this effectively, EMDR follows what we refer to as kind of this 8-phase model, which we'll look at here in just a minute. So there's these 8 phases. There's a protocol that you're probably all kind of, when we think of EMDR, we think of it like an EMDR processing session that follows about 4 of the phases. But one of my favorite phases of EMDR that you can use and combine with a majority of other modalities that you might be using is one of the earlier phases of EMDR, where we build and develop kind of these resourcing skills that are just like coping skills. They are a great segue to use with like DBT, grounding practices, mindfulness, whatever it might be. And you can really have some creativity and flexibility there. So EMDR follows this 8-phase model. Again, under that premise that we're going to try to bring this like adaptive information, the brain's natural healing ability back online. It also encourages us that for that full resumption, to bring the AIP back online and for a memory to fully be integrated and reprocessed, we have to hit on these 3 prongs, meaning we have to get back into the feeder memory or the root memory of where this got maladaptively stored. We have to also address the way that it's currently presenting, so those current symptoms and presentation. And then we also want to identify and target any future anticipation that could be related to this. So maybe anxiety, fear that's sprung because of some of this past or present issues that they're having. When we follow that phase model and we address these 3 prongs, that's where we'll see a natural resumption, bringing that AIP back online. So pretty cool. We'll see an alleviation, just like it says here, of those symptoms, a decrease in distress, and in that overall improved view of self. So the AIP, like I already talked about, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but again, this is really the model that we kind of base a lot of this EMDR off of, right? And normal experiences, when we have normal events and experiences, they tend to be kind of digested and we take away key information that we can learn. But when trauma happens or other overwhelming, stressful experiences, this gets very stuck. And so when we start to apply the bilateral stimulation, this helps the brain come fully back online, which helps then the brain to engage in drawing into this AIP, which we'll talk about the BLS here in just a few minutes as well. One thing that I like to kind of liken EMDR to as well. So any of you that maybe have experienced like intrusive dreams, or you have like really vivid dreams, and maybe have clients that kind of present with similar presentation. And EMDR comes from, right, when Francine Shapiro was first developing this, we were looking at how the brain integrated information and how it impacted memory consolidation. And a lot of that is done at night. So that rapid eye movement, EMDR mimics the rapid eye movement that occurs during our sleep. When we're having those vivid dreams or even nightmares or whatever it might be, that's the brain trying to integrate and process information that you experience throughout the day. when we start to have those reoccurring nightmares, this is the brain saying, this information's here, it's stuck. I don't know what to do with it, but I'm trying to process it. And so EMDR is going to mimic kind of that rapid eye movement or that bilateral stimulation to help the brain integrate information and material that's stuck or that it wants to integrate that maybe it can't naturally do in that natural process of REM sleep cycle during our conscious kind of waking state. So the role of the bilateral stimulation is really quite fascinating. And there is a growing body of evidence now just around the utility of bilateral stimulation itself. So EMDR is kind of known for eye movements, hence the name. I think we kind of associate EMDR with the rapid eye movements. But in the field of EMDR, it really uses more than just eye movements. So not only do we use eye movements, but we also use tactile tapping or TheraTappers that are like these little vibrating buzzers that you can hold in your hand and they kind of like vibrate. You can also use audio tones where you wear headphones and it kind of plays those binaural beats back and forth. And that bilateral stimulation is really just stimulating the nervous system and it's forcing neurons to fire on that right and left hemisphere. So it's helping the brain to start communicate. And when that right and left hemisphere are both being stimulated, it forces the prefrontal cortex to come back online. And this is essential in memory and learning. And so we get this whole brain kind of online. This also deactivates the amygdala. So the bilateral stimulation helps to reduce that activation in the stress response. And it helps the brain, again, then re-engage in that AIP, which is really helpful as well. So just like it says here, clients will often report unexpected images, memories, or beliefs that just kind of pop up in a session. And I like in EMDR too, we are kind of accessing aspects of the subconscious that maybe they couldn't consciously recall. You'll have a lot of those experiences. It's not like forgotten memories. It's more like, oh my gosh, I'd never made that connection to this before. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. And the brain's kind of helping you articulate and piece together where this is coming from while keeping you in a safe, regulated state. So we discussed that three-prong approach as well, where we want to hit on that past, present, and future to resolve things. And this is all done kind of while we're applying the bilateral stimulation. But I want to take a few moments, I'm going to skip over this one, to talk about this framework within the 8 phases of EMDR. So what this actually looks like, right, in case you're curious about this. So just like normal, and ignore some of my acronyms on here, I'll describe what those are to you. We do a normal kind of history intake, rapport building. We get to know the client. We gather their history through a trauma-informed lens. And EMDR really is a client-centered approach. It's really intended to be that way. It's very client-led, which I really like and appreciate because I think that's very freeing for people that have experienced a lot of trauma. And so that rapport building is really essential. So taking time to build rapport, to get to know the client. And then we go into what we refer to as phase 2. And this is the phase I was mentioning that works well even if you don't end up using the full 8 phases of EMDR or wanting to really go into EMDR trauma reprocessing, amazing skills that you can pull even just from phase 2. This is where we start to introduce the bilateral stimulation. And a lot of these skills feel like guided meditation, but we're adding bilateral stimulation. And this is kind of giving us a feel for how is someone going to respond to it. Everyone responds differently to EMDR. So some people might have strong somatic responses. Some might have very vivid imagery that's very maybe like fictitious. You might have some people that just have thoughts. So it's, again, very interesting, keeps it kind of fun and creative. You can create a lot of really cool skills here that are individualized for clients in terms of coping that I really appreciate. Then once we've kind of established building these resourcing skills, we move into what we all think of as an actual EMDR session, which is phases 3 through 7. So this is where we set up a protocol, we identify kind of what we're going to be targeting, the negative cognition. The worst part of this, we're kind of stimulating this trauma memory network, if you will. We're activating it so that we can access it. So we kind of set that up in the first few minutes of this session. And then we go into adding sets of bilateral stimulation where we're adding, whether it be tapping, just so you all can see, these sets of about 30 seconds, give or take, where it's just kind of silent. The client's entering into a free association in their brain. And then we're pausing and they're kind of reflecting to us what they're experiencing, what's coming up. And we're really just witnessing and holding space, helping direct if they need it. But most of the time, we kind of stay out of the way and work collaboratively with the client. And we kind of follow that process until their brain naturally starts to reintegrate whatever it is we're targeting or working on. And then once that kind of gets to this nice resolution or as resolved as it's going to get for a session, we kind of install a new positive belief that they want to hold that can now be linked with this event. We also add some bilateral stimulation for that. We have them check in, do a body scan to notice what's shifted and changed somatically, and then we kind of wrap up the session. We repeat that process for everything that we want to target. So session after session will look very reminiscent of that. And there's a lot of different things, like I mentioned, that we can target and work through. We'll also spend a lot of time returning to phase 2, where we start to build and develop some of these unique individual skills for the client that might be beneficial in helping them integrate some of the trauma or work that we've done in those heavier processing sessions. So if y'all wouldn't mind, I'd love to take a moment and have us try out one of my favorite resourcing skills together to give you a taste of kind of what EMDR might be like. I'm going to invite us all to do tapping just for the sake of being in the virtual space so you know what you're doing. So let's talk about this kind of tapping for a minute. So we want a rotation from right to left. You can tap on your legs too, if that's more comfortable for you. So we're not tapping together. We want a nice kind of rhythmic, just back and forth. And for this, we want it to be kind of slow, just a comfortable pace. Okay, so you can pause that for a minute. I'm a big attachment-based practitioner, so we're going to do kind of an attachment-based exercise here. And I'm going to give you some prompts here in a minute, so it'll feel very much like guided meditation. Some of you might easily find an answer, some of you might not. It's okay if you don't find an answer. Just notice whatever you experience that comes up. So even if you're like, I don't have anything to think of for that, that's still an insight and some awareness, right, for yourself. You can use real people. You can use characters. You can use maybe musicians. You can use animals, objects. So I also want to invite you to be really creative during this activity as well. We'll have a moment where we pause, and then I'm going to invite a couple of you to kind of share what maybe you noticed, and then we'll do one more round of this. Okay, so everyone go ahead. We're going to take a big, deep breath in together, and we're going to let that go. And then eyes closed. Go ahead, start your taps, and you're going to keep those taps going the entire time until I prompt us to stop. I want you to start with just bringing up this idea of resiliency. And I want you to notice just what represents resiliency to you. This might be a person. This might be something that you've experienced. What represents resiliency for you? And then I want you to just start to notice or bring up what represents, or maybe it's even a time where you felt really supported, where you received some support or help or guidance. And you might notice who or what would offer or could offer some support or guidance for you. And then notice a time where you felt really strong. Something, an experience, or a memory that carries with it this idea where you exhibited or exuded strength. And there might be some people or objects or things that also represent this idea of strength for you, that maybe you've emulated. And then last category, I want you to just notice, keeping those taps going, a time where you felt compassion. You might notice those compassionate parts of yourself, or even memories or experiences where you were shown compassion. And just notice whatever comes up. We're going to go ahead, take a big, deep breath in with me. We're going to let that go. Stop those taps if you haven't already. If you need to kind of shake it out, roll it out. Just notice for a moment, if I could get a couple of you just to put maybe what you noticed or what came up. So you might be like, oh, it was easier to stay maybe focused with the bilateral, or I had some random memories or experiences pop up that I hadn't thought of. Would love to hear kind of what you noticed. In the chat, you don't have to raise your hand or anything.
Yeah, so I can share
Please.
just what I noticed was I felt like I was really connected to my body, because a lot of times when you visualize and like imagine, I know for me, like I can kind of get lost in that, and I get disconnected from the body. So the tapping, I felt like I was like very much in the body. So I don't know, it just felt kind of like it like strengthened kind of the visualization. It felt like I was kind of there. It made it stronger for me.
Yeah, I always think it's so interesting because I was someone that also very ADHD, and I could never do like mindfulness, or like my mind would be like squirreling all over. And even though that happens in EMDR, there's something about the bilateral that it does. It's like that dual awareness, right? Kind of keeping you, like pulling you back down. And I'll notice the same thing that you shared as strengthening in a lot of that imagery as well.
Yeah, I also see a lot of people commenting in the chat, so I could read some of those out. So
yeah, that'd be great, I think.
And I'll just read them without the names. I felt the warmth and a tingling sensation during the compassion part. Another person said it was easier to stay present with the bilateral tapping. So I think it's also like kind of similar to what I was saying. Another person wrote, I recalled memories I haven't thought about in a while. Somebody else said, I found it relaxing, but had a hard time with one question, yet was still focused. I was in my mind, but here. So it does seem like, to touch on that, like being very present. It was hard to continue the exercise after the strength portion. I was drawing blanks. Definitely easier to stay present. I felt very plugged into the images of different versions of myself. I can feel the prompt. I felt slightly overwhelmed, had discomfort when focusing on the tapping, emotional, crying with certain prompts, and brought up old memories.
Yeah, thank you guys for the comments. One thing I wanted to say is one thing that's really interesting and I appreciate about EMDR being really client-centered is it's so interesting to me how everyone's nervous system responds differently. So common for like tapping to maybe be kind of like distracting or uncomfortable. That's a normal thing. And so typically that's where it's like, okay, you might respond differently to maybe some binaural beats, or you might respond maybe a little bit easier to the eye movements versus the tapping. So just know that doesn't mean that you did anything wrong, but that we all have different ways that we respond and receive like the bilateral stimulation. I really like auditory. I have a lot of clients that respond and receive that really well. Also, very common with some of these prompts, maybe some of you felt the way that it really kind of takes you a little bit deeper, where maybe it's hard to go with a certain prompt. It maybe like triggered some stuff. It's kind of pointing to where do I maybe need to spend some more time, or it's showing us or guiding us to maybe different approaches or categories that we might need with an exercise like this. So all of it, like every time we drop into what we call a set, like we just did, provides like very unique opportunities to learn and see like what works for you, what doesn't, where is there maybe some pain, where is there some adjustment that needs to be made. So we're going to go in for one more set. If the tapping is distracting, you can slow it down, you can stop it, you can just use it as a guided meditation. So go ahead, we're going to take another big, deep, congruent breath together. So big breath in with me and let that go. And when you're ready, eyes closed, start that bilateral once more. And as you think back just kind of on our prior set that we did, those experiences of resiliency, time of support, and those aspects or times or memories where you've had to be strong, and those times of compassion. You don't have to stay with all of them, but just kind of think of what have these events or experiences, or maybe people that you noticed, how have they shaped you? What have been things that have helped you out of these memories or experiences that came up that maybe drastically changed the way that you move through life? And how have they influenced you in positive ways? And just notice. And keep that tapping going. And just see if there's anything you want to hold on to or remember about any of these categories that we touched on, or those memories. Something you want to take with you. And big breath in for me. And we'll let that go. Stop that tapping. And kind of come back to center. You can shake it out if you need to. And again, would love to hear if anything stood out in particular. Kind of what we're looking for if we're doing this is like, how easy was it for you to kind of drop back in? Could you go back into those experiences? Did it take a minute to kind of settle your system? And then if there was anything vivid that stood out, I'm always curious to know what that is. That tells me kind of where your brain has already been really primed for learning or the direction it even wants to go. Artem, what did you experience that time? I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So the thing that kind of, I mean, there were several things that you mentioned in the first little meditation that stood out, but in the second one, I was remembering, like, I think you mentioned something like, what's a representation of resilience?
Yeah.
And I was just getting this like sense of like a river, like this image of a river being resilient because it just kind of adapts, like the word also adapt, to be able to adapt. And like a river just moves along no matter what's in its way. It just moves around it and moves through it. And
Love that imagery.
yeah, and I found that to be like a very powerful image and like very resonant of like what my process has been in my within myself. So yeah, I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Oh yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I'd love to hear the comments if you want to read those.
Yeah. Um, Different memories of resilience, compassion came up the second time. So interesting. Also, the resilience came up.
Mm-hmm.
This prompt was nice. I think this led me, well, it's moving around now. I think this led me to think that people shape us in positive ways. I thought other stronger parts in myself than I see at times. I wanted to hold on to kindness and love. So kind of like these positive memories and seeing like how people impact us in positive ways was standing out for this person. I was surprised. Yeah. I was surprised that in my mind, strength and compassion had to be linked. Without strength, compassion felt a little scary.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Even though I reflected many times, oh, it's moving around. Many times on a time I was strong, I felt like a new insight came through.
Love to hear that.
Yeah. It felt overwhelming because a lot was popping up, positive and negative moments, and it felt like a lot all at once. I also went blank after the question, how all of this shaped me.
Can I comment on that one?
Yeah, sure.
Also very, very common. Like the first, like several times of EMDR, I will say, especially when you do maybe like even just a resourcing, maybe it's the first time we add bilateral, it can feel like this rapid fire of maybe cognitions or thoughts that tends to dissipate with time. So in a situation like this, we would like really slow down and we might just sit with like this idea of resiliency and maybe we just stay there for about 20 seconds to help the brain kind of not get so overwhelmed or overstimulated. So we can adapt and adjust that, but just know that's also pretty normal, especially if it's one of the first times that you've had an experience with bilateral like this.
Very cool. Let's see. I'll read some more. Had less memories. Oh, it moved again. Had less memories come up, but more feelings, sensations, and thoughts. It it was easier to focus the second round. The prime focus for me was the support I have received from my uncle. He's been a positive male figure. The resilience felt like the sun, warm and bright.
Love that.
I noticed myself getting distracted this time. Fellow ADHer, and it threw me off with my tapping as someone who gets caught up with even simple movements. I found myself unable to focus, which I found frustrating. Do you want
I
to
would
maybe speak
really
to that?
encourage you to use the auditory, whoever that was.
Yeah.
Try the binaural beats with headphones. There's something that really helps that's soothing with the binaural beats that you might end up liking.
I was able to jump back in and was overtaken by emotion again by a different question that skipped the first time. It was overwhelming. So you're getting this kind of overwhelm here also for a couple of
Yeah.
people.
Normal.
I felt somewhat stuck at a certain point, but there was also a feeling of acceptance and neutrality towards something unpleasant.
Interesting.
Yeah. I had trouble dropping back in, but more emotion came up untied to any specific memory.
Yeah, you guys are also noticing, I say EMDR is always known for triggering emotion that you didn't know was there. The bilateral, I don't know what it is. It's something it can bring up and a release of emotion, even with like positive experiences. That is also something to be mindful of with this. Yeah.
Took a few seconds to get back the memories. And when I did, a negative emotion came up first, and I had a hard time focusing on the positive, but I felt strength from the negative and was able to acknowledge how I've grown from experiencing that trauma. Again, tears a few seconds into tapping. Oh, beautiful.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
The tapping helps me stay focused on my thoughts and grounded. The memory that stood out the most, the first few days of coming home from the hospital after giving birth. It was a time or two times I had to be strong. I realized it was bittersweet. Yeah. So I'm noticing there's a lot of like this mixed stuff, like
Yeah, yeah, very
unpleasant,
common, very common.
unpleasant,
Pleasant
pleasant.
or unpleasant. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tapping slows my mind down, which can be hard for me to do. Very nice. Yeah.
Thank you guys for the participation. Appreciate that as well. And love hearing all your experiences. Very common. This is a great example for you all to know what you could experience if we take EMDR into the office. This is what it looks like across the board with clients. Some love it, positive experience. Others, it might maybe take us back to the drawing board of where we need to like slow down. Some might not care for it that much, right? This is a good kind of overview of kind of what EMDR can bring up on a small scale. So I'd love to take this time now to go into the Q&A.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. And, I just want to make a comment. I do a lot of different inner works and a lot of different practices, but I've actually never done this kind of tapping like that. And, I'm wondering if, usually sometimes when you do practices together with people or there's like a teacher on the call, it kind of enhances it. So I would be curious to see if I have the same effect when I'm doing it myself. Because yeah, I did really notice that there was like it just kind of strengthened the visualization. It made it stronger and then it also kind of grounded me in the body. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. I will tell you if you do practice it, like, so I integrate it into a lot of my daily, like, meditation practice. You want to break it up because the body will kind of get desensitized if you just tap for like 5 minutes. So I'll tend to do like tapping for like a minute. Maybe I pause, rub arms, and then come back to tapping. Or if I'm doing binaural beats, I make sure that the binaural beats are like changing the like I have a playlist that's like different types and sound waves. That will help too. So if you try it out, something to keep in mind.
Very cool. All right. So we're going to open the floor up right now. So if you do have a question, you could raise your hand. And if you don't want to be on camera, you could just type your question in the chat box and I will read it out. And I see we have Jeffrey. Jeffrey, you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I have two questions actually. One is something related to a personal experience I had once. The other is really has to do with training in EMDR and certification. Which question, Megan, would you like first?
Oh, tell me about your personal experience. Yeah.
So I didn't think about this in time to put it in the chat, but it was many years ago. It wasn't in a therapy office at all. I was alone in my apartment that I shared with my girlfriend at the time, and we had a view of the Hudson River at that time, and a plane passed over my field of vision, and I just felt a tremendous, overwhelming grief, and I kind of had heard of EMDR at the time, but I couldn't really explain it other than to say that maybe
Yeah.
Shapiro was onto something. So my question is, what was going on? It was a very strange experience. It was completely alien to me.
So when you say that sadness, like you saw the plane, were you watching it? Are you saying you were like experiencing some bilateral? I guess I need some clarity there.
Yeah, it must have been some bilateral stimulation, but it was a plane. It was moving laterally,
Mm.
a straight line, and that's all I remember.
See, very like I want to say something like I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'd love to do like I'd love to process that with you. But what's coming to mind for me, just like many people just described in the chat, that sometimes elicited kind of that strong emotion. Or sometimes the bilateral, I mean, it does kind of, to me, it awakens the brain, it awakens something lying under the surface. That's been my experience of EMDR, whether it connects to something positive or negative. So I'd also want to be curious about at that time of life. I'd want you to go back and be like, well, what was happening around that time? What were maybe some things that had been lying dormant? Maybe you had a little bit of that moving, that bilateral stimulation that was kind of digging up or arose some type of emotional response, perhaps.
That's very accurate.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, no, you're spot on. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, bring me your second question.
Okay. So, I'm very interested in doing trauma work, and I'm finding I'm working with trauma whether I want to or not. And so, I'm interested in EMDR. It's got a very strong evidence base, but the training is
Yeah.
there's so many different ways of getting training in it. You can become certified and do pay $750 for two modules, and then you have to get 10 case consultation hours, um, and you wind up with a piece of paper that says you're certified in EMDR, or you can take a class for an hour for $50. And I noticed you said like there was something about the fidelity to the model, and that something about the fidelity
Yeah.
of the model has to do with. So I'm interested in your thoughts about training for me and anyone who may be interested.
Okay, guys. So, like, I feel like I should apologize to Artem for this answer, but we'll just roll with it because you're going to just get authentic version of me right now. So I was EMDRIA trained, and was associated with EMDRIA, which is the International Association of EMDR, for quite a while. I'm a pretty on the fringe person. Like, I think that where we lie in the landscape of mental health treatment, particularly trauma treatment, things need to change. And I think that people heal in unique, individual ways. So, for that reason, I kind of went away from EMDRIA because at the time, EMDRIA kind of came out and said if you start doing trainings for any institute outside of EMDRIA, you can no longer be associated with EMDRIA. And I feel so strongly just about my own personal experience that everyone deserves to have access to something like EMDR, whether they can afford to take an EMDRIA training or whether they can't. And I don't think that politics should come into play when we're really working with trying to heal and help people. So EMDRIA is a route that you can go. I will say that I really love EMDRIA. I carry a lot of respect because they do try to honor the fidelity of the model as much as possible. With that being said, it doesn't mean that it's the only way that you can get trained. And there's like this weird, I don't know if you guys have noticed this. I'm kind of getting the sense that you have. There's this like weird energy around like training with EMDR where a lot of the times I'm going, what makes it different than like DBT, CBT, other things, right? All those modalities we can get trained in or we can get certified in, but you don't hear as much like pressure around where you do a training as you do with EMDR. It's a very interesting landscape to me. With that being said, what you really want to pay attention to is I really do honor and adhere to the fidelity of the model because I have retrained so many clinicians. Maybe they went through an EMDRIA training, maybe they went through some different training. Regardless of where they did it, if the fidelity of the model wasn't adhered to, they missed some key components where you can do some damage in your trauma work with people that you need to be aware of, right? This is cautious, tender, collaborative work, as any trauma work should be. So I would say like an hour training on EMDR is not going to give you the skills to be able to apply it. I really think this skill set, just like with somatic experiencing or any type of other trauma work, like IFS, for example, as well, like when you get that training, you're required, EMDR requires this. If you're doing a training, you should look for it to make sure that they require you to practice everything that you're learning, meaning not only are you going to be the clinician, but you also have to be in the client role. That is the best way to learn this modality, hands down. And it really does teach you the fidelity of the model. I'm also leery I've had a lot of training experiences where people come back, they get retrained with me or whatever, they maybe received training prior. And I'm shocked at how little training's done around phase 2, because phase 2 to me is what makes or breaks EMDR, to be quite honest. And everyone thinks about, oh, we just got into this trauma reprocessing. But like phase 2 to me is one of the most important pieces of EMDR, maybe as important as the trauma reprocessing, because you come back and you use it so frequently. And a lot of people, I'll be like, so tell me what skills you learned in resourcing. And they'll be like, commonplace, and that's it. And there's like dozens of skills that you can do that really help shape someone's perspective. So when it comes to training and certification, like I recommend like a full, good, comprehensive training. You can do that through EMDRIA. You can do that through various organizations. I'm happy to share a list of places that I recommend with Artem that he could share with you guys. Obviously, I stick to the fidelity of the model, but I don't do certifications with EMDRIA. I'm associated with a different training institute that we give certifications, and we don't charge like an absorbent amount. We care more about doing quality trainings and then helping you get certified. Just like certification for anything, certification to me is more for us to say, hey, I specialize in this. I'm certified in this. You do not have to be certified to utilize EMDR. And you might just take a training and want to just use like maybe some of those phase 2 skills, learn a little bit more about trauma. So that's what I'd say about that. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And I'm gonna get to you in a second, Noah. I just wanted to kind of reflect on a couple of things that you were saying. You see this with like organizations. It's kind of like, on the one hand, they're trying to do like quality assurance. Like if we're teaching like the real EMDR, it has to come through this, and you have to be certified with this organization. And if you go start practicing with somebody else, well, you can't no longer call yourself an EMDRIA practitioner because now you're doing something else. So we don't really know what you're doing. So I kind of see how there's the ability to kind of try to like ensure the quality, but then it also can become like this gatekeeping thing where it's like, we're the only ones that have this method. And then so I think that's like part of like what you're speaking about. And yeah, I mean, this was Jeff's question was actually the question I had, like, what is the bare minimum of, that a clinician would need to do? Because it's interesting, like you guided us through this process, and that in itself is very powerful. But obviously the model, you look at the 8-phase model, when I saw that, I'm like, well, this is very intricate. This is very precise. There's a lot of pieces to this. So to get that model, I imagine you would have to do more. So so
it's like 5, it's about 30 CEs total of actual, but within that 30 CEs, which can be broken up of, like sometimes we do 5 days where it's like 3 days and then a 2-day you have a break, or maybe you do like right now I'm doing one that's 4 hours and we meet every other weekend. In that 30 hours is also that practical application time.
Yeah. And that's what you mentioned about like having to practice it on yourself, and that being an important component of it. So basically if somebody wanted to like start using it in clinical practice, they would have to do a minimum of like 30 hours. And that's something they could do with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I offer basic trainings all the time, and I contract with various organizations that also offer those basic trainings. You can start using the EMDR skills. We encourage you, once you are in the training, we're like, hey, start kind of practicing the stuff you're learning, because if you don't use it, you lose it. So it's not like you can't use anything till you're done. We very much and welcome and encourage that application during and as you're receiving training.
Beautiful. All right, Noah, go ahead and unmute yourself.
So I guess this is kind of in line with what Bree said in the chat, but I have a lot of clients that kind of are easily oversensitized post-trauma, and I'm wondering about re-traumatization from EMDR and how to be careful about that. Usually from them being out touched themselves. Yeah. I know there's like the audio part of it that could kind of take place of the tapping, but how do you deal with re-traumatization?
Yeah, I love this question. This is where I'm going to go back to that phase 2 of what I refer to it as like resourcing. It's preparation. But just like with any good trauma work, right? Helping to start, train, and regulate the nervous system. So to me, it's shortening. We use a variety of skills, like one being commonplace, one being container, where it's very like led. I might, if I'm worried about someone being overactivated, I might shorten that down for like 10 seconds of bilateral where we just notice like, a good feeling or something, and then we come out of it. So you work very, again, collaboratively with the client. You're learning what their nervous system's going to respond to. We test out maybe the different forms of bilateral to get kind of a handle on what they respond to, what seems to work to calm them down and what doesn't. I want to also say one of my favorite ways to start when I am worried about re-traumatization, there's someone on here that is on like a treadmill, and I'm like, that act is bilateral, right? Like the walk and talk is bilateral stimulation. So if I can just start walking and engaging with someone and start to get the nervous system used to integrating kind of this bilateral movement while we process, sometimes simple things like that can be an adaptive way. But I never move into trauma reprocessing, Noah, when I am worried and they are having just a hard time responding to maybe even like a skill we did today. That tells me we need more time to kind of work with kind of regulation and safety. Won't ever move into trauma reprocessing until I see them be able to more aptly handle or integrate some of these earlier skills.
Is it possible that EMDR is not for everybody, like with trauma?
Absolutely, yeah.
And do you find that it's virtual in person is the same effect?
Yeah, I wasn't doing any virtual before COVID, and I was like, how are we gonna do this? And yeah, and actually there had to be because COVID happened, but lots of evidence and research that came out that supports it. I mean, 95% of my work is now virtual, and I see it be just as effective. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's amazing how much stuff can actually transfer through virtual. It's honestly a blessing. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. All right, Rachel, you can unmute yourself.
Like, Rachel, I feel like I know you too.
Yeah, I came to one of your group supervision sessions.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. Artem, I think there were like questions in the chat before I raised my hand, so I just don't want to be rude, and I can go or I can wait. But
no, I appreciate that. We're always going to prioritize the questions that are live, and then we'll get to the ones in the chat. Yeah.
Okay, mine is a little boring and maybe unique, but I did one of those like 40-hour trainings. Which I thought was really good, but like I realized at the end, hey, this doesn't have any practicing. And I've been looking at your website for like, are those practicing sessions going to come up? But I thought it might be about like a question for other people as well, because it's like, it feels like I really need someone to like sit there with me and like I do it and correct me. And like, I just wonder if there's any different roadmaps you could suggest for like that point in time about like
because
you find a friend.
Did you guys have practice time? I can't remember.
So yeah, no, we didn't have practice time.
Yeah, and that is the make or break. When there is practice, exactly what you're speaking to is why you want to look for that. Because there's so much information, then you're like, am I doing this right? Like, what am I doing? What's happening? I offer periodically, I'm getting ready to post additional practice days that are just for that purpose for people that have been trained and you're like, how do I use this? And you practice with colleagues. Finding colleagues or friends to practice with, I mean, I encourage that too once you've been trained is important. And consultation, so important. I still do consultation myself because I just think that it's like, there's times where I'm like, what's happening? And I need some guidance and direction.
Mm-hmm. And if there's anywhere like that you like, yeah, like where can you just go, like to get regular practice? I've been checking your website for like, when's she going to do that? So
I don't know a lot of other places that offer those practice days, but that's something I'm happy to share with Artem when I post those.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You have those opportunities and definitely get all those links and all that stuff for you and share it with everybody. Let's see. So we have some questions in the chat. Well, one of them you already answered. It was basically around not re-traumatizing somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But here's another one. In terms of dissociation linked to perhaps sexual trauma, how would the process work? What would the questions look like? And any insight in your experience What is the research in terms of it being helpful?
With specifically to sexual trauma, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to screen for high levels of dissociation. Honestly, one of the reasons why we spend so much time, I call it kind of front loading in these resourcing skills. So just like you all experienced, right? So with a client like this, I'm going to go in, I might do an activity that's similar to maybe what we just did. And what I'm listening for as the clinician is what was her ability to stay connected to what I gave her? What intrusions came out? Did she quickly go to a dissociative state? So I'm looking at where are we at here with the brain? How malleable is it related to some of this information? How are we responding to the bilateral stimulation in particular? And then from there, I'm going to kind of prime the brain. Maybe we stay in some of these resourcing skills. Maybe I do a couple of them where we're adding bilateral. I'm getting a feel for maybe how this client is going to be responding to the stimulation overall. Let's say they do pretty well with that. Then I might be like, okay, we're ready to move into some of this processing. Typically, when I'm working with things that are very tender, like sexual abuse or sexual trauma, I like to start with a session that we don't just like go straight for it, right? Like, let's work with like a stressor, something else that's going on. Let's build some confidence in the model. Let's see how because the EMDR process outside of even those skills, like the one we just did, there's periods of silence and the brain is kind of like free associatively kind of going wherever it's going to go. And so I want to have kind of a session where we kind of build and develop and we see what's going to happen. So I don't ever just start with the worst thing. We are kind of building a tolerance level, right, for integrating this approach. So maybe we start with current stress or something else we want to work to. I see how they respond to that. Maybe when we get ready to approach this sexual kind of abuse or trauma that we're working with, we might just, to avoid re-traumatization and some dissociation, but a little bit of dissociation is likely going to happen as it does with all trauma in the initial setup. The bilateral is hopefully going to help us avoid going into full dissociation, but we would ask a few questions. Like we'd say, okay, we're going to target the sexual abuse. I don't need details of the sexual abuse. I don't need, maybe we want to even call it something else. The client knows what happened. That's what's important. It's not about me knowing and understanding an EMDR. It's about being there, witnessing, and being present with the client. What feels like the worst part to the client about this? Maybe it's something like that I can't stop thinking about it, or that it feels like ever present in my daily life. I'd write that down. What's it still leading them to feel about themselves? What emotions come up? Where are they noticing it physically? And that's kind of our protocol setup. Then we'd go into adding some rounds of bilateral, and I'd be very mindful of where dissociation is occurring. So are they kind of having new thoughts come up in the sets? If I notice dissociation, I'm going to be more interactive with the client. So maybe I'm going to do a little pendulation, titration, like we might do in some somatic experiencing, like taking them to a calm place and then bringing them back in, right? So we would just kind of really work with where they're at while keeping that dissociation in mind.
Thanks. All right. So another question just popped up. Would you say there are a lot of similarities with EMDR and somatic experiencing?
Yeah, great question. Two of my favorite modalities. I would say that there are similarities and differences. So I would say with somatic experiencing, we're not really looking for meaning making, right? We're looking for just we're not going into a meaning making. It takes out of the processing of it all. It takes out of the experiencing of it all, right? EMDR is more, to me, like in my world, it would be like talk therapy, maybe a little bit, EMDR, somatic experiencing to get rid of the residual of whatever wasn't processed from EMDR. EMDR to me is all about trying to help reshape and shift those neural pathways more so than the body, although you will experience like somatic changes. You're working with perceptions, you're working with meaning making. Somatic experiencing is going to be on a deeper level, but so you'll see some overlap, some differences.
Beautiful. And all right, well, I have a couple more questions. And if anybody else has questions, feel free to dump them in the chat or raise your hand if you want to actually. So, I'm really interested in like different inner work practices and things we can do ourselves. So like you kind of guided us through that process. And like, the tapping seems fairly simple, or if you wanted to just listen to binaural beats and like that would be a similar way of stimulating it. But I guess like what are the other steps? Because you're doing specific prompts. So I'm wondering if there's a specific like process, like a 5-step process, kind of thinking of like a CBT, how you could have like the CBT sheet and you just kind of read it out. You usually would do it with somebody, but you could also do it yourself. So I guess I'm wondering how effective can something like that be in terms of doing it ourselves without somebody guiding us through it? And then also like what the 5 steps or whatever, if there is something like that. And maybe not also like, maybe it wouldn't be like, processing crazy traumas.
Yeah,
That's something we want to do with somebody else. But like you said, you could use it for a lot of different things like performance, different things like that. So just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, so a lot of our basic skills, there's kind of like these go-to skills that I think of when I think of these early skills, one being calm place. And this is like basic, anyone that's done like safe place, calm place, and other outside of even EMDR, it's very reminiscent of that, where we're just adding bilateral and we're literally going through the 5 senses. Like, what would you smell in this place? What would you hear? And we're just applying a little bit of that bilateral. We encourage clients to use that out of all of these out of sessions as well, because it's going to really help with grounding and regulation, and you can add to your toolbox. So those I have like little handouts for Complace that they can follow and listen to. There's some good guided directives on a couple of like, I love Insight Timer that has like a good Complace guided meditation for EMDR that you can follow along with. So it's those 5 senses, you're adding bilateral, and you're just kind of going through those sensory details. You can pause after every sensory detail with the bilateral, or you can do it all together. Container's another one, and this is where we kind of create either a real or imagined object where we're placing unwanted thoughts or feelings in this container. We teach it in session. And then outside of session, same thing. We encourage them, hey, if there's something unwanted, a trigger or whatever that comes up, add this little set of bilateral and see if you can envision or think about kind of placing, this unwanted thought or image into the container. And I am gauging for that, like how well can they use that in and out of session. But we encourage all those skills. The one we just did, typically I do what I refer to as like restoration team. One of my favorite attachment-based skills that comes from some of Laurel Parnell's work. And we go through and we think of like figures or objects that represent different categories. And they can kind of tap those in. They can be kind of like their inner advisors that kind of help give them advice or kind of talk down maybe some of those negative cognitions. So we do encourage the utility of those. Obviously for trauma processing, like I'm sure some of you have seen like do EMDR on your own. Like, no. I wouldn't even do my own EMDR on my own. And I just think you never know what's going to come up, and you need that external insight and awareness to kind of also help ground you or maybe pull you out if something does pop up that you don't know what to do with. But adding that bilateral to any type of calming exercise in those little intervals, so 30 seconds to a minute, and then maybe pausing, is a really nice way to take some of that with you and practice on your own.
Yeah, very cool. And you mentioned the attachment. You're big on attachment. So we the last expert we had on was David Elliott. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
There's the ideal parent protocol that he developed with Dan Brown. Dan Brown was my meditation teacher before he passed away briefly. But I was just thinking about like doing that ideal parent protocol and integrating that. I could imagine.
A great one to integrate with this.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love weaving practices together. And
I do too.
Yeah. Beautiful. So I see a couple more hands. Kaylee, would you like to unmute yourself? Ask the question.
Yeah, it actually goes really well with what you just said, Artem. Weaving together like different modalities. So I'm an art therapist, and I'm just curious if you know of any research around like integrating these ideas into art therapy, it's something that we talk about, in school, like the bilateral nature of some of the art, art techniques that we use. But I'm just curious, like, do you have any resources specifically?
I love integrating art with EMDR. I think art in and of itself, just like you said, carries kind of its own little natural piece of this bilateral movement and everything else. I integrate a lot of artwork. So I used to do a lot with adolescents and kids, and having them like draw like a calm place out. They can have eyes open, incorporate some of that bilateral. I've used scribbling itself as a form of bilateral stimulation for certain people. I like to even incorporate even in the trauma reprocessing, like we do a set of bilateral. They don't want to talk to me about what came up. They can draw pictures of representations of that processing. So really integrates really nicely. It's actually one of my favorite ways, especially with people that have that really creative, adaptive mind to process and work through things.
That's really great to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, Phyllis, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have two questions, and I guess I'll just piggyback off of what Kaylee said because I'm a music therapist. And like in your very first slide, you have those kind of like four parts of the brain where you mentioned, I think it was like decision making, thought processing, and memories, and then a fourth category of creativity. And when you mentioned sort of like those neural networks and the neural loops, I see how like three of them really can get stuck. They're all related to each other. They all feed into and off of one another. How does creativity factor into those three other elements in terms of the healing process and those neural networks and things like that?
Oh, I love this question. So my favorite way to do EMDR is when you have someone that can be really creative and free with their mind. So, I mean, where it's almost like dreamlike states where everything is kind of maybe a little bit imaginary, but it's the way that they're trying to abstractly work through or process. And just like I talked about with that art, when you can pull in that creative component, you'll run into less blocks. So I love to integrate a lot of like creative strategies. Like I have a lot of people I always share, like when we do this one exercise restoration team, they'll pull like, Gandalf or Dumbledore, and you're like envisioning having like a conversation with, and maybe this is someone that's had a lot of complex trauma that never had guidance or support, but the fact that they could use this creative part of the brain, which is also very formative and important in the development of the brain. When you can drop in and tap into or bring in that creative aspect, you'll find that healing happens much quicker. You'll see EMDR processing actually work much more rapidly.
Thank you. And my second question is kind of related to the speed of the bilateral tapping. Like if you're meeting somebody who's perhaps in a more hypomanic state, or if someone's a little bit more depressive, do you sort of like meet them where they are and then slowly modulate them up or down? I'm curious about, because sometimes we can come in a more heightened state as well. What are some guidelines around what speed to do that?
So kind of the rule of thumb is slow to enhance. So like everything that we just did would be a little bit slower, more rhythmic. So if I want to draw attention to, I want to really like strengthen an image, slower. When I get into trauma reprocessing, fast to move through. So quicker to move through. If I want to go back to like someone asked, like what if someone comes in, they're having like we're doing like complex, they're having like some intrusive images. Maybe we need to speed up the bilateral just a little bit to push out some of those intrusive images, or maybe we need to shorten it down. So if we get lots of overwhelming information, it usually means like slow the bilateral down and shorten the period of time that you're in a set. Sometimes if you're getting nothing and it's blank, it means you need to extend the period of time you're using bilateral, and maybe you need to change the pace of it. So slow to enhance, fast to move through.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. So unless anybody else has questions, I have a question, and it's a bigger picture question, which I also like to ask. And you mentioned that things need to change, that you believe that things need to change with trauma treatment. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more of like what you see kind of the landscape in psychology and trauma treatment right now, and what you feel like those changes need to be? What direction do you feel like we need to move that would be more generative in healing trauma?
I like this question. I just think that we need to take more of an individualized approach and recognize that healing comes in unique individual ways. And sometimes we're limited by, I think, what our ability is, right? We have all these parameters that kind of get placed on us. Some of them are necessary. Some of them can create barriers. One of the biggest things that I see is, and that I've found the most in my work, is sometimes in our profession, it can create an unspoken power differential. Like, I'm coming to you and you should have the answers and you should help me. But really, we're equals. Like, there needs to be more humanness of this. And what I appreciate about approaches like EMDR and even somatic experiencing, right? Peter Levine talks about like the wounded healer, like healing the healer. And he first is doing his own somatic experiencing through one of his students that he's teaching, right? Which would be like looked down upon. We need more of that authenticity brought to our practice of like, I know certain things that can help you, but at the end of the day, I want to align with where you're at. And let's like collaborate and figure this out together. And I want the people that come into my office to know that they're already like an expert on their own life. And I want them to help catch me up to speed. And then maybe we can bring kind of our ideas together versus like getting sucked into this diagnostic place that I feel like we've really moved into in the field, unfortunately, which saddens me because it sets, again, a difference between us and the people that we're working with that limits someone, that prevents them, I think, from healing. And I think all of us have probably experienced this. I also wish that there was more support for us in this role. I think a lot of us feel like maybe we can't go get our own help or healing done because we're trauma practitioners or whatever it is, but we all have our own stuff. And the more that we can speak authentically to our struggles, the better able we are to connect with people that we're working with.
Yeah, no, very much resonate with that view, that orientation to this kind of work. So I appreciate that. And maybe this might be the last question that we have time for. Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, I have also like another really practical question.
Yeah.
Like, some people, they do the bilateral stimulation and they're like, oh my God, that was like a whole new experience for me, right?
Yeah.
Like something really happened. And other people, they're kind of like, well, it was fine, but I don't really know. And, so you keep experimenting, but how do you know when to say like, I think it's, let's keep doing it because like they're not objecting, but they're not like blown away. Like, I just wonder how you have conversations about that range of.
Check in with them. Is this helpful for you? I mean, sometimes I'll say like, are you liking the bilateral? Here's why I want to keep adding it. So if a lot of people, if they know your intention, they're more willing to work with it. They might not be like, oh my gosh, I'm in love with it, but they might appreciate the utility of it. So if I explain, here's my intention, and I'm not afraid to be like, do you love it or do you hate it? We don't have to keep using it, but if you're finding utility in it, then let's do it. I might say, here's what I've noticed in maybe our work together. I don't know if you've noticed or drawn these same conclusions about the changes maybe I've seen and what we're able to process when we add bilateral versus when we don't. So sometimes that reflection and dialogue can be helpful. Great question, Rachel.
All right. Beautiful. Yeah. Megan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on, and yes, very comprehensive, and really enjoyed hearing different people's questions. And like, I'm kind of struck by, on the one hand, there's like a simplicity to the method, but I understand this is kind of just the introductory, like, looking at the 8 phases, like it seems like it's also at the same time very kind of comprehensive and precise. So there's a depth to the method at the same time. So I'm like kind of struck by these two sides of it. And it seems like a very powerful method. I know it's been a very, we do surveys asking clinicians what they're interested in. EMDR is definitely something that is on on top of that list. So it's been beautiful to kind of get a taste of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciated being here with you guys and getting to share a little bit about my love for EMDR. If you guys have any questions or anything, or want to learn more about training or just about EMDR, I'm always happy to share resources or point you in the right direction. I'll put my email in the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'll make sure to get all the links to your work and to your training, and any other resources you could also share with me through email. And I'll make sure to include this when I upload everything on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for showing up.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.